Let's bring in Dan Perry in Tel Aviv. He's a former regional editor for the Associated Press in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. Good to have you with us. So how optimistic are you about the possibility of a ceasefire coming through with Amos Hochstein in the region?
It's very hard to say. It depends on the time frame. I think Israel's in a state of mind where what they seek is not a ceasefire, but a reorientation of the situation on their borders. I don't think they will accept anything less than Hezbollah being far removed from their border and no longer right on the border digging tunnels, no longer in any way firing rockets at it. I think they want the entire region and the world to stand up as one and declare that that is illegitimate, and that Iran's influence in Lebanon is no longer acceptable. Now, will Hezbollah agree to such a thing? Will Lebanon or anyone else find the wherewithal to step in and force them to agree? I don't know, but I think it depends on that. The one thing I can say for sure with great certainty is that Israel is determined to have that be the outcome.
Do you suspect things are going to escalate even further after the US election? There's been some suggestion that maybe the expected or the vows by Israel and Israeli officials to hit Iran have been put on some kind of ice until the elections are done and over with. What's your perspective on that?
I think that's very true. I agree with you. I think November 5th or 6th is a potential pivot point because Netanyahu and all of Israel understand, I think, that the Democrats currently in power are rather desperate to have the region not go up in flames and might be willing to pay a price if Israel plays nice until then, in order to ensure that Israel's response, if it exists at all, will be moderate, simply because the entire Middle East war is a wedge issue for the Democrats, where they risk losing Michigan because of Muslim voters if they go one way, and they risk losing Pennsylvania because of Jewish voters if they go the other. They need the war to not exist for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Israel may be willing to give them that in exchange, I suspect, for below-the-radar promises to help do a paradigm shift in the weeks after, which have seemed implausible for decades. But I think even though Israel's situation vis-a-vis the Palestinians is a complex and difficult narrative with no moral high ground on anyone's part, I think Israelis feel in something approaching a consensus that the entire Iranian project of filling the region with proxies that dominate the countries that host them and that are bent on attacking Israel, that this is obviously that it cannot continue. And they're going to press that point. I have no doubt about it.
Is there, in your analysis, I'm wondering, as I hear you speak, we often hear that line from Israeli officials that, the problem is Iran. What about the occupation? Is there any thinking that along the lines of, if we really want to have long-lasting peace, security for everyone in the region, that the Israeli occupation of, let's face it, territories of several Arab nations, from Gaza to the West Bank to the Shabaa Farms to Golan Heights, that occupation must end. It's unlikely to have peace and security and occupation at the same time.
Well, look, the Israelis are determined to keep the Golan Heights. The Shabaa Farms, they think, is a red herring and essentially nonsense. It's a few square kilometers, and it's just not a real thing. They don't buy that Hezbollah is resisting Israel. They don't think they're occupying Gaza. The actual occupation that is relevant, I think, and everyone gets it, is the West Bank occupation. Now, much of Israel certainly accepts
I'm sorry, I do have to jump in because the ICJ has made a ruling on July the 19th that stated that all of the territory that Israel occupied in 1967 is occupied, including, that of course includes Gaza. So that's already been adjudicated.
I know. The ICJ's ruling is what it is, and as you know, it has no enforcement powers, and Israel rejects it. Look, the question of what constitutes a country's territory.
But Dan, sorry, isn't that part of the problem? Is that Israel keeps rejecting what much of the world's legal institutions see and say? Do you not think that's part of the equation here?
If you ask me my analysis, I think absolutely Israel needs to find a way to separate from the Palestinians, whether or not we define its presence in West Bank as illegal. Now, another part of the problem is that Israel fears that if it pulls out of the West Bank, it'll have some version of Hamas or ISIS taking over the West Bank. Now, viewers should know the West Bank surrounds Jerusalem on 3 sides and comes within 30 kilometers or less of Tel Aviv. This is not a small concern. So there is a hope that in the wake of this nightmarish era, this absolute cataclysm, maybe some things will change. Maybe Israel will comprehend that it really needs to seriously figure out a way to get out of the West Bank, or most of it. Maybe the Palestinians will accept that whatever territory they gain sovereignty over will need to be completely demilitarized. But to wave aside Israel's concerns about the strategic dangers of pulling out of the West Bank, it's, trust me, not a way to go forward. So there is a hope that many things can change in the wake of the debacle. But one of the things that needs to change is Iran creating proxies all over the region with which to attack Israel and with which to undermine the sovereignty of countries like Lebanon. I don't know if Israel's occupation of the Sheba farms, which is as big as a farm, is one of the major problems in geopolitics, but Iran's occupation via Hezbollah of about a third of Lebanon certainly is.
Thank you very much for coming and expressing your thoughts and analysis, Dan Perry.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Dan Perry. He's a former regional editor for the Associated Press in Europe, Middle East and Africa. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. Thank you for your time, sir. How optimistic are you about a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel with Amos Hochstein in the region?
In the short term, I suppose I'm not that optimistic, because I can see that Israel is in no state of mind to agree to anything other than an implementation of the two Security Council resolutions that add up to not only Hezbollah moving back from the border, but the disarming of Hezbollah. Something realistically that I'm fairly certain the Lebanese political establishment wants as well, but it's going to be difficult to impose it on Hezbollah and on Iran. So I wish I could be more optimistic, but I think Israel is not going to relent, and I don't see in the short term Hezbollah relenting either, despite their degradation. So this could go on for some time.
How genuine do you feel the United States' intentions are here? I mean, is Mr. Hochstein an unusual choice as mediator, given he was born in Israel and even served in the Israeli military?
Look, yeah, I think the American perspective on this is that it should not be viewed ad hominem, and America is a country of immigrants from all over. And, you know, Philip Habib, at some point, with his Arab background, was a mediator, and you can be skeptical about Hochstein. But I think the bigger issue is that the Americans, in fact, share Israel's goal of implementing 1701. I tell you frankly, I think not to do that is a violation of the global order, and indeed, it would be a favor to Lebanon. It's just very difficult. So I don't think Hochstein's goal and the U.S. goal really is de-escalation. I think rather, it is to find a way to reorder Lebanon and help Lebanon impose its sovereignty on its territory. I don't think it's reasonable for Iranian proxy armies to be parked in other countries and to be attacking Israel. So I think the U.S. sees it that way also. There needs to be a decoupling, I think, from the U.S. perspective of this Lebanon situation from the Gaza situation, which is really, really complex, and where the Israeli government, I fear, is engineered because of its right-wing component to block a day-after plan, even if there was a way to get Hamas to surrender, which seems at this point far from certain. Israel's not yet willing to discuss a day-after plan, so that puts them at loggerheads with the U.S.
I also want to ask you about what we're hearing today about the 7 Israelis who've been arrested on suspicion of espionage for Iran, for gathering intelligence on military sites and identifying potential human targets for Iran. How worried should the Israelis be about this latest security breach, which it seems led to what we saw at the Golani base just a few days ago?
Look, the Iranians have more than one way of finding out certain basic things that everyone in Israel knows practically as to where things are and so forth. It's obviously disturbing from the Israeli perspective, but of course, they live in a glass house because Israel also spies on Iran. It's hardly new. So even though, you know, they're going to investigate it and there's going to be introspection and lessons learned and whatnot, realistically, I don't think it moves the needle on a grander scheme of things in the conflict between Israel and Iran.
OK, thank you for your time. Dan Perry joining us there from Tel Aviv, former regional editor for the Associated Press in Europe, Middle East and Africa.
My pleasure.